So in this tutorial, I'm going to give you guys, I'm going to demonstrate how to draw in Rhino in 2D a set of orthographic projections to represent the forms you've been working with on your studio project. So I'm going to demonstrate using just some made up, but hopefully this will act as a reference to kind of help you guys with some of the tools that you'll want to use in developing orthographic drawings. So first I'm going to go into Rhino. I want to change my units. I'm going to work in feet. So, unless you're working on a scale model in Rhino, you almost always want to be working at the exact scale of your object, at full scale, in other words. And then scale as you drawings and so on and so forth, or export, say. I'm just going to turn my grid off. Okay, so I'm going to start by drawing a plan, but again, you don't need to choose any particular projection to draw first. What you want to kind of do is, based on your model and based on the dimensions you're sure of about your form, start to draw in a projection where you have a certain amount of information, and then you can kind of build on your other projections based on whatever you choose to draw first. So I'm going to draw this kind of spiral strip thing, and I'm going to work plan first. So I'm going to start by drawing a plan. I'm going to set up a couple of different layers as I'm drawing, just to keep myself organized. So over here I made a layer called construction lines. And the first thing I'm going to do is draw the spiral that just defines the layout of these strips. I could choose the command spiral. I'll choose the option flat. Click some center point. Choose a first radius. I'll do something like feet. The first start point, something like that. Then I'll choose one and make my radius 14. Let's do 12. Okay. So now we have a kind of spiral. Again, I'm just going to use this to establish order of the strips. Next thing I would do is I would draw a line, and I'm going to use the command line rather than line, because I can draw a line to the normal, sorry, not normal, perpendicular to an existing line. For example, if I click on this point on this line, draw a line perpendicular to this spiral curve at any. Start there, and I could enter now a length. Start with 3, and then click. And what I'm going to do next, and you can do this in any number of ways. So I need to array a series of curves that will define the center lines of my individual strips. I could do that first of all by using the command array. It'll ask me for objects to array. I want a straight line I just drew, and then press enter. Ask me for a path, and that's my spiral. This panel will appear, and you can enter a number of objects you want it to array, or you can distance between those objects. I'm going to say 12. Okay, so you can see it's evenly arrayed that original line 12 times along my curve, perpendicular at each point. So that's one way to do it. The other way we can do it is I could select my spiral, use the command divide. Number of segments would actually be 11, because if I divide it 11 times, I'll have points. Okay. 3, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Then what I could do is I could draw each line independently. So again, use the command line, option perpendicular. I'm actually going to draw something with different length lines at each point. So I started with 3, maybe I'll go 4. And I'll just go 1, getting longer. Again, I have Smart Track turned. So you can see that the points that I'm drawing from are selected by Smart Track so that it snaps to them. Okay. I just want to double check. I'm using the command length. Screw it up. So they should all be 1 foot longer than the. Okay, that's pretty good. Okay, so that's a good starting point. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and use these lines as a kind of set of center lines for the strips that form my object. Or I'm sorry, form my structure. So now I'm going to switch over to the layer medium. This is just one of my drawing lines. I'm going to use a series of different line weights, but for now I'm just going to draw everything on one weight. Specify later. Switch over to that layer. Use the command offset. Select each curve, and now I can just choose a distance to offset. Choose 2 feet. So going to select both sides. Let's go 1.5. 1 foot. Okay. And I'm also going to hit this option cap. If I hit cap, first of all, by default, it'll just offset a line to 2 sides. If I go to cap and select flat, it'll actually offset the line and connect them to each other. So now when I click, I have actually a rectangle centered on my center line at 3 feet. That is 2 feet. And so I'll just go 1 by 1. And I'll have to hit the option, I'll just type B both sides each time. Okay, and I'm just going to draw everything on top of itself now. And then when I'm ready, what I could also do would be to turn off my construction lines. And then I'm going to go 1 by 1, kind of erase everything that would be not seen because it would be below. I'm just using the command trim here. Oh, excuse me. You could go kind of one by one and clean it up. Each like subsequent strip is on top of the smaller one. These would. Okay, so that's a good starting point. And now what I could do is I could work from these lines and begin to do an elevation. So I'm actually going to try and draw it looking towards this kind of opening where you enter. I'm going to turn on all my layers and actually rotate this guy. Again, you can always work by rotating. You can always work by rotating objects and then rotating them back to their proper orientation if it makes it kind of easier to, like figure out how the section or the plan or the elevation would align to each other. So I'm going to rotate that guy around. Then again, I'm going to switch back to my construction lines. I'm going to establish a ground plane up here and then start to draw construction lines up. I'm going to begin with just one strip, the biggest one. I'm also going to draw a line now that is so this is kind of important. What I need to do is, each one of these strips is kind of curved in space. So what I need to do is draw one version of that, kind of perpendicular to a strip, so it's not foreshortened at all. Just so I can establish what that curvature is. Then I could go ahead and say, okay, well, now that it's foreshortened, I can figure out kind of between my plan and my elevation where the ends would land up in elevation. So I'm going to start by just drawing a line that is the length. So I'm perpendicular to this strip. I'm going to draw a line the length of that strip. And then I'm going to use the command divide again. I'm going to divide it into 3, so I'm just kind of making up a curve here. Say I wanted this strip to be, let's take the length of that curve. What is that? Length is 14. Let's say the height of this is about 7. We should make it taller. So let's go with like 2/3. 9.24. Okay. So now that I've already drawn that line, I can use the command scale 1D. 9.2. Oops. Scale D. Click on both ends of the line to just enter an exact dimension, 9.24. Okay. I could check it just to be sure. Length 24. Okay. Now I'm going to draw a curve interpolated between the two endpoints where the strip meets the ground and its highest point, which is 2/3 along its length. And I'm just going to use the command arc. Instead of using a center point, I'm going to use a start point and an end point. Actually, I'm going to draw it from the highest point. Start right there. The end will be obviously here. Then I can choose a direction, which is why I started here, because I want the direction to be completely horizontal at the highest point, or the apex of the curve. Again, I'm going to choose, draw another arc, start point. Again, I'll choose the apex, end point, direction, draw it out like that. Okay. So we've actually drawn a curve that kind of sticks out like that, which is fine if that's what your curve looks like. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale it so that it fits within the dimension of the length of that strip in plan. So I'm going to select both of those curves and join them first. Then I'm going to again use scale 1D so that I'm not changing the height of the curve, just the length or the kind of width. Now what I want to do is I want to be able to snap to the point out here that is kind of furthest out this way. In this case, because I'm drawing an arc, that's also considered a quad, right? So if I snap to my quad out there, draw my line down to perpendicular with my original scale point, and then I can draw it back. Just like that. So that's our curve. And I'm going to go ahead and delete these construction lines. And then, rather than try and redraw this each time, what I could do is say, draw a new construction line for each a new set of construction lines for each strip. And I'm just using the center lines from my plan. So I'm drawing from the ends of these center lines. And then I could make a copy of this guy. So I'll copy it first. Then I'm going to scale 1D each one. The other way you can do this, by the way, is if you draw straight out and hit Tab on the keyboard. Again, that constrains your cursor to one direction. Now it's easier, we can just snap to that quad and bring it back. And I'm going to try and follow the same rule here. So the length of this one is 13. 13 times 2/3, 8.58. Scale 1D. Again, I'm going to choose the apex of the curve, the highest point, draw it down to my ground plane, snap to that highest point, 8.58. There we go. So that's my next curve. At this point, because we're not looking at that curve straight on, what we would actually be seeing is a kind of representation of ends of this curve. Now, even though we deleted one end of it, because the two ends of each strip are parallel, the short ends, we can just use this set of end points to figure out what that curve would look like if it had depth and it was sort of tilted in its projection. So if I select my original curve, I'm going to copy it using Command Copy. What I'm trying to do is copy it from the center line so that I'm representing that edge and that edge in my elevation. Copy it from the center line. Now I'm going to hold Shift, hit Tab. That's going to constrain my cursor to ortho. Then I could click one endpoint. Again, Shift, Tab, the other endpoint, and then delete the one. So that's the kind of, tilted version of that strip. And you would actually also see a straight line between the top that would represent the width of the strip. Again, snap quad, we can snap to the kind of highest point of each curve, the other highest point, and then we can just trim between. Okay. And I'm just going to repeat those steps for each curve. Copy this. Oh, I guess that would be the height, and then copy it to each end. Oops. Delete the center line. Draw straight between the two tops. So. Now you may also find it a lot easier to kind of hide things as you're working, or to get some of the information out of the way so you can really see what you're doing better. For example, it's getting a little confusing because we haven't really composed this yet. Just telling which strip is which. So I could select this strip, or I'm sorry, select all the strips and hide them except for the curve I need to copy. I could deselect that one using Control, use the command hide, copy this guy. It'll hide that one. Scale 1D. Times 2/3. Okay. So at this point, we're starting to see the strips actually overlap each other. So this one, I suppose, would actually appear behind this one. So now this will also kind of help us create depth, start to trim away the parts that are actually not showing in those projections, so we can sort of see what the three-dimensional arrangement of these are. This one's really narrow. Okay. Again, I'll hide everything except for the one curve I need. This one, I would actually go ahead and mirror it. So now we're looking at the strip from the other side. So option copy. Oops, don't delete that, hide it. And again, all we would really see of that one pretty much be, typically we would see just a little bit there. And that's the kind of thing, kind of edit out, start to find these little bits of lines are just getting distracted. Okay, so at this point I'm also going to just kind of give you a quick, I'm not going to finish the whole thing, but I will just give you a quick set of for composition and for maybe ways to think about representing 3D space. So the first thing I would do here is actually add thickness to each of these strips. Obviously, they would, they wouldn't be, kind of zero thickness in reality. So what I could do to represent the thickness would be just to offset each curve, or offset the leading edge of each curve, the outside edge. So I'm just going to use the command offset. I'm also going to use the option cap. So if I click on cap and select flat, you can see that's also connecting our original line with our offset line. Distance, I'm going to maybe choose like 1 inch. Maybe a little more than that. Okay, and then I'm going to offset them all on the same side, which is important. I'll offset them all inward. Be sure you're keeping track of which edge is the okay. And again, we could use those, trim away what we wouldn't be seeing. Okay. We would actually end up getting rid of all these lines. Okay. And then I would also actually just go ahead. Obviously, we don't want to show the ends of our strips like this. So I'll just explode them, select all the end lines, and then I'll use the command extend. Now I have my ground plane selected when I started that command, so if I just enter extend with nothing selected, it'll ask me for a boundary object, or in this case that's the ground plane, the flat bottom curve we have here. Then I press enter and it'll ask me for what curves do I want to extend. I could select these. Okay. That way, it shows them kind of going all the way into the ground. At this point, I could also, make a couple more layers. Call one of these heavy, light. Now, this is a bit of a tricky thing to represent because these curves are obviously rotating. So part of the curve is closer to us with each one, and part of it is kind of further away. So what we could do, well, first of all, we also want to make sure that it's clear that these lines aren't all part of one object, but that they're separate kind of individual objects. That is what profile lines are really good at doing. And I think it's a good point of reference when doing orthographic drawings to kind of basically try and do as much as you can with line work before you kind of move on to using things like poche or shading and multimedia, like things like collage and stuff like that. So we're going to try and kind of, even though it's starting to become clear how this object works three-dimensionally, and actually I'm going to set this one again. I just realized that as we offset these, they would also become foreshortened as part of this, like It's starting to make it look a little bit more clear three-dimensionally as well. But what I was saying was, if we start to give a profile of each of these strips a different line weight, that will help us distinguish sort of what's separate, basically part of our. I'm going to go in here and start to explode some of these lines. First one, obviously the whole thing is in profile. Change that over to my hip. This one, take those outside lines, this line, as well as the kind of inside line, which we would have to split, use the split. Again, we're showing the edges of the object that are touching the air in order to distinguish this strip from this one, and so forth. Move. Okay. That's an important step. And then what I could also do with the remainder lines would be to say, okay, obviously this profile line strip is kind of perpendicular to my picture plane, projection plane. But some of these ones, like one side is coming closer to me than the other side. This edge is closer to my projection plane. This edge is. So I could start to take some of these other edges. Third layer, and build some hierarchy, some depth that way. Now, the way to really study whether or not your line weights are working, I think, is always to make a layout. Because, like I said, like I showed you, shop drawings, you can apply line weights and look at them in your viewport, but they won't be scaled. So what you always want to do is make a layout first. So units. Sorry. Sure. Select layout. I can make a new layout. Let's just say ArcD for right now. Doesn't really matter the page size until getting ready. Posing. But then once I have my layout, I would select the detail window. It's this frame through which we see our model space. Select it, properties, choose detail, and set a scale. Choose 1/2 inch. But and then I also want to set my viewport to, so choose whatever scale is called for on your assignment sheet. And over here in the layers panel, I could start to print properties. Well, I'll set them all to black. And the print color is the diamond. Diamonds selected. Choose black. Could also now, it's up, so it's a little easier. I'm gonna start to define some print. I can also use the one and kind of look at it roughly at the scale that it'll print it, and we can line weights good. Start to evaluate whether or not our line weights are reading properly. Start to really kind of sense the three-dimensionality of this thing. Still actually, say those lines should be reading as heavier, medium. Okay, we can really start to read the three-dimensionality of this object through, subtle line. And down here, I think, especially in the case of a complex tree like this, it can actually be helpful to be able to see the construction lines superimposed, this kind of layer. So first of all, maybe I'll go change this to heavy layer. Again, it's important here to use a convention in your drawing. Even though I just put those on the layer heavy, obviously if section cut would be heavier. This. Just for now, leave it like that. So now it's starting to read a little bit better. I'm just going to delete my points that I used to construction line. Type SELECT, select. Just delete them. 1 to 1. It's starting to look a little bit, starting to have some hierarchy, but I think it would be better still kind of see these less as solid lines and more as kind of grid lines. So I could make an additional layer now. This, or actually, we can just do this to our construction. So you can make an additional layer and set it to dashed, or you can just make your construction line layer dashed. Now I'm going to choose a line weight, pretty light, about equal to the latest line weight. And I'm also going to here. Now I think in this case we need to read less as a kind of pattern and just as a really, so even if I choose the dash line, to me this is still like too distracting. Dashed, which is at that scale. I use the command options. So looking at I'm using the hidden line pattern, line type pattern. It's 0.07 by 0.7. I'm going to make make my own. Thing. Set the spacing to 20. The other line is 0.07, 2. Just put a comma. So the first number represents dash, the second number represents the length of the space. Also how you can create this kind of dash. Okay, now set this line type, this layer. Now it's looking a bit solid, but maybe slightly lower space. Okay, so that's reading really like a light line, which is we want it to read like a really, really light, solid line. And I can also, still kind of reading too heavily, choose gray for print color, lighter, stands apart. Of course, the final test would be to print it. do a kind of PDF print. And I would choose Rhino PDF. It should automatically know page size, scale. I can choose my layout. Scale, because we've already scaled it on our layout, I would choose is equals to foot, print file. And then we could go ahead and look at the resolution of that line when we print it. So you can see, based on the resolution we used, dashes aren't even coming out, which is a problem. So we would go ahead and increase that line. So the other question to ask would be, so let's try vector. Destination type, choose vector. Let's just override that. Still not reading. That's interesting. Okay. So we would just have to make that a little bit light. And the last thing I want to show you is a kind of quick technique, maybe for starting to understand how we could look at three-dimensional objects. For example, how would we know by looking at the top of the strip that it's not just like a perfect arch, or that it's not a rectangle frame or something else, right? How do we represent that this surface is curved in this projection, because we don't see any of the curve in this projection, just looking at it from the top. So I'm going to give you a quick one method, and there are many methods. Start to represent that. I'm just going to actually go ahead and hide everything else. Okay. So I'm going to use the outside curve. And I'm actually going to just divide it. So at this point, I'm also going to make another layer. Got my 3D lines or something. I want this to be a pretty light layer, because we're going to basically create like contour lines. Like, you can also, okay, let's keep it. Select this line, edit, segments. I could choose, I'm going to choose a lot, something like 36 even. We have 36 evenly spaced points along this curve, and what I could do is take those points and project them back in. So now I will use the, oh, actually no. Rather than divide it, select point, delete. We could draw the construction line that we use. So we could actually better also to start with the quad. Looking at this strip from the top downward like that, we don't actually see any of this strip. It's part of the see that part. So now start from the quad. I'm going to draw a construction line that's a lot longer, that like goes through my surface. Now I'm going to use the option curve. Okay, the construction is the enter. Use the arc as the path curve. Number of items, I'll choose 6. Okay. Now, oh, sorry. So one thing, obviously, that it did is it arrayed them so that they're oriented to this original curve. You don't actually want to do all the stay straight up and down. Try this one more time. Curve. Select the path curve. This time under orientation, I'll choose no rotation. So you have to maybe put this line at 1 points. Let's try one more time. Ray curve, path curve. Okay. There we go. Now we just go over the ones past where we see the ones that intersect with the end. And then I'll select this strip, trim. So now I have a kind of representation of how the curvature is spaced 3D projected into. And I can go select the lines, put them on my new layer. These. Also, then I can group them. Rather than doing this for each curve, what I do is actually array them relative to each of my constructions. In order to do that, I would use the command orient, copy, option to scale. Now I'll use my centerline curve from first strip as reference, and I'll snap to the next one. Actually, I'm just going to put this over to the side. Hide that one. See, it's not. Now I would have to kind of go in and trim each time. Okay, so that and hide it. Copy these for the next one. Orient the center line as reference. So again, it's scaling that pattern down to the appropriate length for and just trim excess lines. Deselect the ones, regroup that set, orient, draw. You're going to just go ahead now, and just like with manual fabrication model making, it's often faster to do the same step all on to the next step. This is long. See what you're. This. Okay. Step 2. just ungrouping, deselecting the one you want, and regrouping. Okay. And then if we were to go back to our plan, again, we're keeping those lines relatively light. In fact, I would even make them kind of gray. But again, because of the spacing, it'll kind of give us a sense of the dimensionality. So that's just one way to do that. Again, it'll be up to you to kind of develop something that makes sense for your shapes. Obviously, the more you test and kind of try different things, the better your results will be. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and sign off now. Will be a second part to this tutorial, kind of explaining how to develop further some of these drawings, how to add additional layers and include site information. For now, I would begin by just kind of drawing basic shapes of